Professeur Thompson, on a invité un professeur qui a déclenché l'une ou l'autre controverse dans l'exégèse. Il fait partie de l'école de Copenhague, avec Niels Peter par exemple, l'école des, entre guillemets, minimalistes qui ont bien dit que la Bible n'est pas vraiment une source fiable pour reconstruire l'histoire de l'Ancien Testament et l'histoire de l'Ancien Israël. Sa thèse de doctorat, The Historicity of the Patriarchal Narratives, de 1974, a déclenché une controverse, même à la faculté catholique de Tübingen. Mais l'école biblique était bien courageuse et l'a invité 10 ans après comme professeur invité. Il a enseigné ici. Depuis 1993 jusqu'à 2009, professeur Thompson était professeur de théologie à l'université de Copenhague. Son travail porte sur l'histoire et la représentation de l'histoire. Quelques livres parlent de sa thèse de doctorat, The Mythic Past, Biblical Archaeology and the Myth of Israel, The Bible and History, How Writers Create the Past, Jerusalem and Ancient History and Tradition, The Messiah Myth, Biblical Narrative and Palestine's History, the Bible and Hellenism. C'est seulement un petit choix des livres, pour ne pas parler des articles du professeur Thompson. Ce soir, il va nous parler Memories of Esaü, Themes of Conflict and Reconciliation. C'est notre joie que vous êtes venus du Danish House in Palestine, à Ramallah. Et je vous laisse la parole. Et déjà, merci d'avance de nous donner cette conférence. Merci.
My subtitle for this lecture is important, I think. An allegory of conflict and reconciliation. I think it's important because this lecture takes up a question I first raised back in 1999, that we distort and misunderstand the function of most biblical narratives about Israel's past when we ask whether it can be used as history or as historical evidence for our history of Palestine. And I suggested at that time, rather, that we commit ourselves seriously to trying to understand more clearly why such stories in fact were written. In the Bronze Age and Iron Age period, the towns of Jerusalem in the north and of Hebron in the south were two significant but small and sporadically settled patronage towns of the southern highlands. Excuse me, I'm going to have to change my glasses. Excuse the fumblings of an old man. I have tunnel vision, and I do never know whether I will be able to read from a text properly. Thank you. Lachish and Gezer, in contrast to Jerusalem and Hebron, held patronage over the Shephelah, and at times in competition with Jerusalem and Hebron. They may have controlled patronage over the smaller and more sparsely settled highlands. In the early Iron Age, Tel Meshash and Beersheba in the south were the dominant patrons over the northern Negev, and the Egyptian-influenced market towns of Ashkelon and Gaza were the patronage centers over the broad southern coastal strip. Southern Palestine supported a Mediterranean economy, interrelating three geographically distinct economies of grain and field agriculture in the plateaus, valleys and plains, olive, wine and fruit, horticulture on the slopes and terraces, and herding, especially in sheep and goats, throughout the steppe. While the highlands suffer a long period of drought, which brought about a considerable desedentarization of the highlands during the late Bronze and Iron I periods, the expansive growth of the small patronage kingdom of Judah with the resettlement of the highlands does not unequivocally develop until well into the Iron II period, that is the 9th and early 8th century. This pattern of Judah's expansion reflects a development that is very similar to what we also see in the small patronage kingdom of Edom from early in the 7th century and south of the Wadi al-Haza and the Dead Sea, with its center in Basra. Both Judah and Edom owed their political development in the form of regional patronage kingdoms to the expansion of Assyrian influence in the region in the late 8th and 7th century. In particular, the development involved the active integration of these climatically mixed Mediterranean and steppe regions as active clients in Assyria's development of mining at Tel Khalifa and the Fainan, as well as in the related expansion of the Arab trade network. The earliest clear references to Jerusalem's hegemony over the region of Judah as a whole are associated to a list of kings who paid tribute to Tiglath-Pileser, Tiglath-Pileser III, in the period from 734 to 732. In which Ahaz of Judah is mentioned alongside kings of the patronage kingdoms of Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Gaza. Jerusalem's role as the city of Judah continued under Assyrian patronage through the reigns of Sargon II and Sennacherib. It was seriously weakened by Sennacherib's punitive campaign against Judah in 701. This not only led to the siege and destruction of Lachish, but also to a thorough political reorganization of the region, involving the destruction and transfer of the patronage of many of the region's villages to the coastal towns of Gaza, Ekron, and Ashdod. The development of a considerable part of the population also effectively eliminated Jerusalem's immediate hinterland. The mid-7th century's expansive resettlement of the Shephelah and the growth of Jerusalem's population spreading to the town to the western hill seems best associated with Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal's sedentarization policies, expanding the region's Mediterranean economy, which was centered in horticulture, herding, and grain agriculture throughout both Edom and southern Judah, including the Beersheba and Arad basins. This resurgence was initiated by the construction of fortresses across the northern steppe, which suggests that in both Edom and Judah, a portion of this economic expansion involved the development of Basra as an administrative center. An explanation of Jerusalem's expansion should consider also an Assyrian policy of a forced sedentarization of the steppe dwellers of the Arabah, the southern Transjordan, and the Negev, in an effort to exploit the Arabah's copper mines and further trade in that region. With these changes, southern Judah and Edom began to develop a socio-economic continuum through the large steppe region, significantly integrating the population of southern Palestine, as is reflected in the pottery of such sites as Aroer and Tel Mahata. An increase of Edomite influence in Judah is also reflected in the Edomite style of the forts. Not only had Edom and Judah shared common historical roots, they also shared closely parallel economies, fluid borders, similar languages, and religious traditions. Already in Egyptian inscriptions, from as early as the reigns of Amenophis III and Ramses II, for example, we have references to the toponym Yahu, suggesting that the earliest references to the god Yahweh in the late Bronze Age were linked to the Shasu, who were steppe dwellers in the regions of Seir and Midian. From the 9th century, the Mesa stele from the patronage kingdom of Moab also refers to Yahweh worship at Nebo. Moreover, 8th century inscriptions from both Kuntayat Ashrut and Kirbat Okom associate the god Yahweh with his Asherah in association with the named cult centers of Samaria and Taman. Samaria, of course, refers to the primary city of the patronage kingdom of Bet Humri, or Israel. And Taman refers to Tawilan in Edom. The possibility of Yahweh's origins in Edom, or areas closely associated with Edom, such as Seir, Paran, Taman, and Sinai, survives. Also in biblical etiologies, for example, in the book of Judges, Yahweh, when you first came from Seir, when you first marched from the land of Edom. There is also the Yahweh etiology in Habakkuk. God came from Taman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Besides these two very clear references to origins, the personal name, Etan ben Kushayahu, related to the temple cult, is clearly rooted in a syncretism of the gods Yahweh and Chaos. Next section, destruction, collapse, reconstruction. In the early 6th century BC, after having raided the Arabs in the steppe regions of Hatti in his 6th year, Nebuchadnezzar II laid siege to the city of Judah. Having captured the city, he appointed a new king and took heavy booty. During the following decade, Jerusalem and Judah were devastated by the Babylonian army. Much of the surviving population was deported. The destruction and dismantling of the region included Lachish, Ramat Rachel, Arad, most of the towns of the Judean highlands, the Beersheba and Arad Basin, and the fortresses of the southern highlands and the northern Negev. The destruction in the area of Benjamin, however, was not as thorough. At least 3 important sites survived undamaged: Bethel, Gibeon, and Tel El-Ful. And the 4th, at Tel El-Nazba, though damaged, nevertheless survived and was rebuilt. Not only are there clear signs in stratum 2 of continuity, but it may be understood to have prospered in the Neo-Babylonian period. Significant changes in the city plan and fortifications suggested to many scholars that Tel El-Nazba had become the administrative center and is to be identified with the biblical town of Mitzpah. Babylonian destruction of Judah reached Tel El-Kulefa and the Fainan. which were abandoned in the 6th century. Edom itself was, however, not attacked in Nebuchadnezzar's campaign. It is likely that Basra, as Babylon's faithful client, supported the Babylonians in the campaigns against Judah, at least in the southern portions. Such sites as Arad and those in the Shephelah, where the Edomites had long-standing interests, for example, as is implied in the references to Edomite hostility in the Arad Astrakhan. This is number 24 and number 40 of the Astrakhan. Edom is not attacked and Basra destroyed until Nabonidus laid siege to and captured the city of Edom. The withdrawal of Babylonian patronage over the Edomite kingdom was related to its loss of involvement in the copper mines of the Arabah and the Arab trade routes. Incursions of Edomians into the Judean highlands and areas further west followed on the collapse of the mining and trade industries, which centered at Tel Khalifa and Fenan, and was related to Edomian cooperation with Babylonian forces. When, however, trade collapsed and Basra and its patronage over Edom was abandoned, the geographical continuum between southern Transjordan, the Arabah, and the Negev included also the whole of southern Judah, as the population of these two formerly distinct regions of Edom and Judah became common. In the 5th century BC, this southern region was reorganized as a Persian province centered in the city of a rebuilt Lachish. The population of Jerusalem and the surrounding area hardly recovered. Jerusalem was drastically decimated population, did not recover in the Persian period at all, and is estimated to have been hardly more than some 400 to 1,000 persons. Few architectural finds attest to any kind of town center before the construction of the Hellenistic city in the 2nd century BC. It seems clear at present that Jerusalem first recovered its Iron Age II role as a market and administrative center only in the 2nd century BCE, under Antiochus III. One should, however, not conclude that Al-Quds was entirely empty during the Persian period. What remains that have been found survived almost exclusively in fills between later buildings or along the slopes east and west of the Ophel. The administrative center of the Persian province of Yahud was not in Jerusalem, but in Ramat Rachel. Jerusalem maintained some role as a religious center, which was maintained intermittently since the Middle Bronze Age. Some recovery came to Judah's southern highlands and the Shephelah already in the mid-5th century, especially after Lachish had been rebuilt as capital of the Persian province of Idumea. Under the Seleucids, Idumea may have expanded westwards all the way to Ashdod. In the Hasmonean period, John Hyrcanus took over Lachish and set the region under Jewish law and ritual. In his second account of the Jewish subjugation of Idumea, Josephus references to a forced conversion and circumcision of the Idumeans is perhaps more etiological than historical. Josephus may be read as a rationalizing memory of a common religion which had been long shared by Jews and Idumeans since the Iron Age, a common religious and cultural heritage which hardly distinguished them at any time before the aggressive policies of cult centralization of John Hyrcanus in regard to Idumea, Samaria, and the Galilee. Josephus' parallel discussion of Hyrcanus' destruction of the centuries-old Samaritan temple and forced adherence to the forms of observance in the Jewish temple and ritual within a Hasmonean policy of religious hegemony. Next, I would like to discuss Yahweh's eternal hatred. The Torah's conflict story of Jacob is the third example of a tale type in Genesis within an allegorical discourse on Idumea and its Idumeans, which forms a single discourse and shares with the creation story of Cain and the ethnographic doublet story of Lot and Abraham. Cain and Abel of the first story are given dichotomous roles: the elder is a farmer and the younger a keeper of sheep. These roles they inherited from their father Adam, who in his story had been both gardener and shepherd. In the Jacob story, an elder twin Esau is a ruddy and hairy hunter of the steppe, while the younger Jacob is a soft-skinned, tent-dwelling shepherd. Genesis 4 also shares with Jacob's narrative such politically tempered themes as brother fighting brother and the younger surpassing the elder, ever available to strategies of legitimation and delegitimation. The opening of the Cain story with Yahweh's acceptance of the younger Abel and rejection of the elder Cain is, in the Jacob story, reiterated as an echo of the prophetic thematic play with Yahweh's eternal hatred over Esau, or for Esau. I believe this intentionally parallels, but as we will see, also rejects this ubiquitous prophetic curse. While such themes of the Cain story echo and intensify the garden story, several of its most significant elements form a cluster of stereotypical motifs which are also associated with Esau's tale, such as burning anger, imitating not only Esau's murderous anger in the Jacob story, but also Yahweh's irascibility throughout the Torah. Also significant are the curse of the ground in the opening of the garden story, reiterated by the wasteland in which Cain must find his home, as well as the puzzling conundrum of Yahweh's merciful compassion and protection of the murderous Cain, or the murderer Cain, through an astonishing commitment to a divine revenge. It's with this last motif of revenge, the promise of a sevenfold revenge for any that might kill Cain. And the link between Cain and Esau suddenly becomes direct. For in the genealogical closure of the story, Yahweh's patronage is superseded by Lamech, his greater irascibility of a 77-fold revenge. It's not merely Esau's murderous anger at Jacob the trickster, who deceives him at every turn, which shares such passion for revenge. The figure of Lamech within his genealogy plays the role of allegorical identification, offering a key to the story's interpretation. We must be careful not to forget the figure of Yahweh's servant Job in the land of Uz, the extraordinary figure whom Yahweh finds Noah-like, blameless and upright. Uz, where Job lives, is east of Eden, with the nomads and the metalworkers of the Arabah. In Genesis' story of Lot, as we will see, Eden, the Garden of Delight, becomes, with the destruction of Sodom, the Dead Sea region of Edom. The name Uz comes from the Arabic Ud, refuge, and identifies Cain's place of refuge in geographical heritage. The story of the twin brothers, Jacob and Esau, an allegory of an enduring conflict between two peoples, develops a threefold tale of conflict which is steeped in a virtual memory of return. The dichotomous yet intimately related roles of Esau and Jacob reflect the two closely similar regions they represent in a literary metamorphosis which offers a reiteration of Cain and Abel's representation of the nomad and shepherd story, or motif. In regarding such allegorical play, one must say that the dramatic hatefulness and passion adhering to the figure of Esau as Edom are hardly surpassed in the Bible, except in the parallel and related roles of the three sisters in Ezekiel, chapter 16, the three sisters of Jerusalem, Samaria, and Sodom, as we find here. Such harshness is particularly apparent in the prophetic references to this allegory. Such a raging declaration of war against Edom, as provided by Obadiah and Amos, encourages First Maccabees' creation of an updating version of Yahweh's Day of Wrath to celebrate brothers Maccabees' conquest of Hebron with a vengeful expedition against the Idumeans of southern Judea. When Malachi opens his book in a declaration of Yahweh's love for Jacob and hatred for Esau, it calls to mind motifs of revenge and reversal, both from the Cain-Abel, the Abraham and Lot, and the Jacob-Esau narratives. As great as its hatred for Edom, whose inheritance had been the valley of the Jordan, once a Garden of Eden, which Yahweh had reduced to a wilderness of eternal ruins, just so great and eternal is his love for Jacob. While Malachi's dichotomy is given narrative form through the contrasting roles of Jacob as shepherd and Esau as hunter, as well as of Isaac's love for Esau and Rebekah's love for Jacob, such dichotomies provide marks of identity. Our allegory's red and hairy Esau evokes the redness of Edom's hills and Seir's trees, just as the tricky Jacob's aggressive swindles gives recurrent etiologies for the name Yaakov. They also provide pivotal episodes coherence. So, Rebekah's plan to deceive the blind Isaac with an imitation of Esau's heir and Esau's hate-filled decision to murder Jacob for just such identifying tricks. Using an opening curse of an eternal divine hatred for Esau, Malachi directs the reader to his book's dominant focus, Yahweh's unrequited love for Jacob. Malachi 1:6 and 3:15 to 3:15. This fertile contradiction finds its resolution in a closing reference of the identity of those who have rejected Yahweh into ones who fear and serve him. Malachi turns to Moses' Torah to close his work with a transformation of the messenger whom Yahweh was to send to guide Israel at the very opening of the wilderness story, that his text might also return, and in this reversal bring reconciliation to the conflict which had opened his prophecy. With reference to the Jacob and Esau narrative, as well as to Numbers 14, where judgment had come to the first generation in the wilderness, Malachi identifies Elijah as the prophet to be sent to provide Yahweh's terrible judgments. Fathers will be reconciled with their sons, and sons with their fathers, and they will avoid judgment. My next section is destroying the righteous along with the wicked. In dealing with the richness of the desert as a thematic element, Jeremiah uses Jerusalem to mark the climax of Holy War theology in a series of interrelated cameos. In Jeremiah 4, the prophet has a vision of Jerusalem's coming desolation, returning to a tohu wabohu, desert-like chaos before creation. He echoes the eschatological chaos of Psalm 18. I saw the earth empty and void, and the heavens without light. I looked to the hills, quaking, and all the mountains swayed back and forth. Jeremiah's Jerusalem answers Abraham's question on behalf of the innocent of Sodom by searching for but one just man in a city in which all men sin. In doing so, he betrays plot-echoing awareness of Solomon's declaration about Jeremiah's Jerusalem, namely, when, as the future Solomon, he must pray that Yahweh learn mercy. In Isaiah's version of Edom's curse, chaos overwhelms its fortification and it becomes a haunt of jackals, the home of ostriches. In Cain's story, his failure to watch over and control lurking sin brings banishment and retribution to Isaiah's jackal's lair, the desert land, implied in the garden stories, thorns and thistle. One important story which helps understand the motif of the desert is the story of Abraham and Lot's wealth and herds, which are so great that the land cannot hold them. A conflict breaks out among the herdsmen because of this. Abraham allows then Lot the choice between east and west for his heritage. Genesis returns to the theme of the lost garden. In making his choice, Lot looks towards the east and sees the Jordan Valley, as rich with water as Yahweh's garden. He makes his choice and pitches his tent at Sodom. Readers are warned of the coming disaster. The men in this town were evil and sinned much against Yahweh. Yahweh decides to confide in Abraham and tell him what he plans to do, that the patriarch through whom all the world will be blessed might learn justice and righteousness. However, the story's ironic humor turns the discourse rather to Abraham's instruction of Yahweh. Shocked by Yahweh's easy commitment to destruction, knowing his Torah, Abraham, as Moses and Aaron had asked before him, asked, "Will you really destroy the righteous along with the wicked?" This is Numbers 16:22. The patriarch's question regarding collateral damage opens a debate that presses Yahweh, who answers, "Okay, for the sake of 10. I will not destroy them." Yahweh again misses the point of the question. Neither Moses and Aaron, nor Moses and Aaron, nor now Moses are asking how many innocent will sufficient to save the honor of a whole town. But they are rather asking whether Yahweh is the God of justice or some other God. The author refers to a process of learning which Yahweh is undergoing. As a debate, this issue engages the reader through the whole of the Torah. Both in the mercy of Cain's refuge in Genesis 4 and the wrath of the story of Yahweh's thoughtless destruction of all they had created in the flood story. The debate over the hatred and impending destruction of Edom's Sodom maintains its tension as Abraham questions imitate Jeremiah's frantic search of Yahweh's beloved Jerusalem to find not 10 but only a single man who might be seen as just and seeking truth. So far, had Yahweh come to value mercy when one comes to read Jeremiah. But even that one innocent can't be found in Jerusalem, where all men sin. And Yahweh's divine hatred wins over his love of Jacob, and Jerusalem is destroyed. Following Abraham's debate with Yahweh, the judge of all the world, over the fate of the innocent of Sodom, Genesis 19's story of a threatened rape of Lot's daughter leads the reader relentlessly to the city's destruction by fire and brimstone. Yahweh's relentless fear and terror overwhelm Lot's sons-in-laws with hesitating disbelief, and his wife with the curiosity of a recast Eurydice. On an intellectual level, the debate over the value of innocence is left unresolved by the story. Echoing the garden story's curse of paradise loss, and commenting on the story of Sodom's destruction, Jeremiah's relentless oracle against Edom dismisses this region's future as an eternal ruin, its destiny reduced to the fate of widows and orphans of the Torah's lost generation. Even-handedly, evoking the fall and collapse of Jerusalem and Babylon, Jeremiah projects Edom's fall from pride as sharing their fate, an object of scorn and derision for all who pass by. Just so is Basra likened to Jerusalem, a once great city, to be totally emptied like Sodom and Gomorrah. A similar linking of Edom with Sodom and Gomorrah is found in Isaiah's description of Yahweh's day of vengeance, on which Sodom's destruction, like that of Jeremiah's Jerusalem, returns to the land to the tohu wabohu before creation. Such associations bring support to Jeremiah's great diatribe against Babylon, with which his book closes, culminating in an Armageddon in which Yahweh, in the role of divine warrior, sends the flood against Babylon and kills Bel himself, that he might rescue Jerusalem by tearing its prey, Job-like, from the great dragon's jaw. This cardinal victory marks the point of departure for the patriarchal narratives. I'm dating the patriarchal narratives later. Following the variant we find in the story of Babel, Babylon's victims, freed from the dragon's teeth, now join Father Abraham and turn towards Zion. Then I would have a section on identifying the blind and the lame. Who are the blind and the lame? The progressive thematic theme between violence and injustice and a resolution of conflict and reconciliation and new beginnings supports the allegorical discourse of these stories. These are to be linked to efforts for peace, which characterize the threefold progressive reiteration of Abraham and Lot's division of the land, which closes the first of the so-called wife-sister stories. While the ultimate goal of separating the patriarchs in a geographically conceived ethnology, separating Lot's descendants, that is Ammon and Moab, from Israel's Judah and Edom, the development of the plot is driven by the conflict of shepherd's tail type. The land could not support them, and quarrels arose. Perizzites and Canaanites were in the land then, so there must be no quarreling. Even so, touches of humor and irony slip into the narration. Abraham suggests that Lot choose where he will live. If you go north, I will go south. Or if you choose the south, I will go north. So, seeing the rich watered plain of the Jordan, Lot chose all the Jordan plain and took the road to the east, correcting the previous. In striking contrast, a second parallel story takes the form of a threefold pact and has its context during Abraham's story in Gerar under the patronage and protection of good King Abimelech. The herdsmen of Gerar, having stolen a well Abraham had dug, he complains to the king, who declares his ignorance of the incident. Abraham gives him some sheep and cattle as they make peace, and when Abraham sets 7 sheep apart from the others and gives them as evidence that he himself had dug the well, the story closes in reconciliation and in etiology on the 7 in Beersheba's name. The third tale engages a comparable visit to Abimelech's Gerar by Isaac and Rebekah, which begins in a similar deceptive presentation of the patriarch's wife to the kings as his sister. A punning alliteration on the names Isaac encourages the patriarch to fondle his wife, resulting in Abimelech's discovery that the cousins, in fact, are married. Sharply rebuking Isaac's irresponsibility, the good king once again stands warned for the virtue of a patriarch's wife. The narrative is then taken up entirely with a threefold variation of the quarreling herdsman's tale type. In the first episode, Isaac acquires great wealth, and the Philistine herdsmen become so jealous that they stop up his wells, the wells which Abraham's people had dug. When you embed there in the earlier story a self-conscious fingerprint of the author, when Abimelech asked him to leave because of the threat such wealth brings to the peace between their herdsmen, Isaac moves to the Wadi Gerar, where his herdsmen dig and discover a spring, which bring Gerar shepherds to quarrel with Isaac's servants over the water. Avoiding a quarrel, Isaac appropriately rather gives the spring the name Esaü because of the trouble it created, and moves on to dig another. However, this too creates a quarrel with Gerar's herdsmen. This well Isaac names Sitnah because of the hatred it created. In his third effort at peace, Isaac finally succeeds. Celebrating this victory of peace, he names the spring accordingly, Rehovot, open space, room for all. Peace established, Isaac moves on to Beersheba, where again his men dig a well. Abimelech offers a peace pact, asking Isaac to swear an oath that they treat each other with mutual respect and goodwill, a fulfilling illustration of Yahweh's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3. In celebration of their pact, Isaac's herdsmen strike water the very same day, a spring, which Isaac calls Sheba, or oath, offering the reader yet another etiology for Beersheba's name. With such a progressive reiteration of making peace with those living in the land, the bearing leitmotif of Genesis 12:3 comes to dominate the expanding world of patriarchal stories. This greater narrative now turns to consider how the trickster-driven Jacob-Esau conflict story might be made to function in support of the theme of peace. Jacob and Esau's conflict, which Genesis places within the Toledot of Isaac, Abraham's son, begins with a brief and succinct introduction composed in 3 episodes. A previously barren Rebekah, Eve-like, complains of her hard pregnancy. The children fought within her. Yahweh interprets the violence and provides the allegorical key to the great Jacob-Esau conflict by identifying the 2 babies as 2 peoples, which fates are bound together and to be reversed. In the second scene, twins are born. The first is Esau. He is ruddy and covered with hair appropriate to one who is destined to the red hills of Edom and the trees of Seir. His brother was born by grabbing hold of Esau's heel, Akev, creating a pun on Yaakov's name. In the story's 3rd episode, the boys have grown up. Esau as hunter of the steppe and Jacob a tent-dwelling shepherd. As Jacob was cooking a red stew for his dinner, Esau asked him for some of it, for he was starving. Jacob demands his older brother's birthright in payment for the stew. Esau, complaining that his birthright will be useless if he were to die, agrees. Although this scene may be ambiguous, for the seriousness of Esau's hunger is uncertain, rendering the distant reader unable to judge whether Jacob's demand is extortion or Esau's response, blatant disrespect. Nevertheless, when Esau does sell his birthright for the red stew, the Edom-like stew, the present narrator's voice of commentary declares that in this way, Esau despised his birthright. So the author doesn't like Esau's behavior here. The present narrator, It is more than interesting that the conundrum is comparable to Ezekiel's accusation against Judah's Jerusalem. Because you broke an oath and despised your covenant. There's an echo in the language here. Is the basis for Jerusalem's shame for mistreating his younger sister, Sodom, that is Edom. So one may well read this as a commentary on Jacob's mistreatment of Esau. The long conflict story, which these 3 episodes introduce, is presented within a 3-fold narrative envelope structure, one story within the other story. The first envelope deals with the conflict of brothers, built on the theme of supersession, that is, on Jacob's effort to supplant Esau. It closes in the story of Rebekah and Jacob's plot to deceive the old and blind Isaac, which explicitly evokes the historical heritage of Jacob's Yehud and Esau's Edomiyah. Esau has been twice supplanted by the trickster Jacob and his exceedingly bitter cry at Jacob's betrayal expresses his hatred for his brother, moving him to a plan of murder and revenge. A double scene marks the narrative's process. Learning of Esau's plan to kill Jacob, Rebekah opens the way to reconciliation by sending Jacob to her brother Laban in Haran until Esau's fury should pass. A variation of this resolution has a deceptive Rebekah complain to her husband about Esau's Hittite wives and demands that Isaac send Jacob to Paddan Aram to marry her uncle Laban's daughters. This suspension of the conflict with Jacob's exile to Haran opens the second envelope of the greater story, in which Jacob and Laban become involved in a 2-decade-long comic plotline of tricking the trickster, centered in Jacob's love of Rebekah and marriage to Leah, with a plot driven by Laban's deception of Jacob and 7-year bride price for his daughters. Finally married to both the beautiful and beloved Rachel and the weak-eyed, unloved Leah, Jacob reaches the third envelope of our story, a conflict between the two wives over love and children. What began as a competition both between barrenness and children and Jacob's love and indifference not only brings the women servants as surrogates into the collective success in bearing 12 children to Jacob. The conflicts are comically resolved in the sisters' cooperation and mutual support. Comedy finally wins Jacob's love for Leah and overcomes Rachel's barrenness as a son's mandrake roots purchases a night of love with her husband for Leah and ensures Rachel her fertility. With the birth of Rachel's son Joseph, the story turns now to the Jacob and Laban conflict, that Jacob might accumulate great wealth through trickery and magic at Laban's expense. When Jacob awakens the resentment of his brothers-in-law and loses Laban's regard, Yahweh orders him to return home. Jacob leaves with his wives and all the cattle he had acquired, with Rachel stealing her father's gods, and fled in secret. Laban gives chase, and after 7 days' flight, reaches Jacob in the hills of Gilead. Our trickster's conflict is finally and definitively resolved in a long scene of quarrel and accusation, a mutual quarrel and accusation, closing in reconciliation and covenant. After a peaceful departure from Laban, Jacob ends his exile to Haran, a reflection of the Samaritan tradition of exile and return. Jacob and his narrative now returns to his conflict with Esau to complete the transition from conflict to reconciliation. First, with the messengers of Mahanaim, 2 camps, as his guide. He divides his family and large company into 2 camps and cautiously goes forth to meet Esau with his 400 men. He sends a message ahead to his brother with rich gifts, asking that he might win his favor. Praying to Yahweh, the God of Abraham and Isaac, I am unworthy of the true and steadfast love you have shown me. The aggressive trickster here, Jacob, returns a wiser man from exile and wishes reconciliation now with Esau. Jacob's transformation is a struggle that is marked metaphorically. Jacob was alone that night, and a man wrestled with him until dawn. And when the man found that he could not defeat Jacob, he struck him in the hip, crippling him, demanding that he let him loose before the coming dawn, asking in turn that the mystery man bless him Jacob is given a new name summing up his life. He will be called Israel. El fought, because he fought both God and men and won. Jacob leaves his final struggle lame, eternally impaired, and with his father. And I'm sorry, I misread this. Jacob leaves his final struggle lame, eternally paired with his father, Isaac, as a humble representation of the lame and the blind. The Torah's representation of all who are to be treated with compassion. When he now in this new role among the lame and blind of this world, he goes out to meet his brother in humility. Esau runs to meet him, and they embrace and kissed and wept. And while the story has Jacob go on to Shechem and to Bethel, and his sons become Israel's tribes, he comes together with Esau when his father Isaac dies, old and full of days. The story closes with Esau taking his great family and possessions that he had acquired in Canaan and went into a land apart from his brother, because like Abraham and Lot before them, the land of their wandering could not support them both. So great was their wealth. So Esau dwelt in the hill country of Seir. Esau was Edom. Thank you. Oh, yes, of course.
Thank you very much, Professor Thompson, for this conference. There's a possibility to ask questions about it.
What would be your answer, historical, literally, to the many names that are used? Esaü, Edom, Seir. Is it historical reality? Is it poetical? Why?
But Edom was a patronage kingdom in the Iron II period. It is a historical place. And the closeness between Edom and Judah, if you understand, Jacob is playing the role of Judah in this etiology, or excuse me, in this allegory. The closeness between between Judah and Edom is very, very tight, where it is almost a common cultural unity. By the time that Nabonidus destroys Basra, you have a continuum across the south of Palestine, which is quite astonishing. And this is the role of brothers, I think, in that. Here you do have you have the stories playing with history, and the problem is to interpret that. Their stories are not telling history. They're interpreting it, and they're telling you what God did in this history. Is this an answer to your question? I'm fumbling.
No, that's true, because I asked about the many names that are used for the same reality. Edom, Seir, Esau. Do you have any hypothesis?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Plurality of names, is it significant? Is it normal? Why would we have so many names for the same person?
I think I don't know first. I haven't done that work. But I think what we need to do is to try to find and relate our story with stories which handle some of the same themes and motifs, or names, because names can also play a role as motifs within a story, with a storytelling, and try to find the answer there. But I think the only way that you can understand an ancient story that has more than 2,000 years behind it is to find comparable stories with an equal antiquity and distance, and there, of course, in our field there have been many efforts to do that, but it does take time and patience on that. Am I answering? Yeah. Okay, anybody else?
Ask one.
What? Two.
You mentioned the lame and the blind.
Yes.
Isaac, Jacob. Has this to do, perhaps literary niveau level, with the conquest of Jerusalem? The blind and the lame will.
Yes. This I take up in my Bible and history book. This is a direct reference to the story, or the story is a direct reference to the Jacob Esau, depending on which one is the earlier. But yes, I think the two are very closely tied to each other, and but this comes out. I don't think we really have a really satisfactory answer to that kind of allegory, but it is one that stays with the tradition. So that in the New Testament, you have the lame and blind are not allowed to come into the temple, which is in the David story, and that comes up for Jesus to interpret. But you do have a constant questioning of that. But the lame and blind are also very interesting because they become epitomes of the poor and the outcasts, and it's just as much as widows and orphans play this kind of role in the book of Numbers, in Numbers 14 story, where the Israelites are sent back into the desert to die, and that's the origin of the 40 years story. And they come back, widows and orphans, and the widows and orphans will be protected. I appreciate very much your coming. I'm very moved by coming back. The first time I came to the École was in 1972, I believe. Could be 73. Where I was asked to give 4 lectures on my dissertation on the historicity. And I must say that the École has protected me against some rather harsh conflicts with the academic world, and I've always appreciated this very much. Thank you.
Unfortunately, our students just came back 1 hour ago from their study trip to the Negev. So,
they're sleeping.
My few students probably are now present.
Every time I came back from the Negev, I went to sleep.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.